Hey folks, this clip is brought to you by Farm Bureau Health Plans. For better coverage, better rates, and better service, go to fbhp.com/ATOZ. That is Farm Bureau Health Plans. Outside of that, we were going to talk about who has stood out. You can only tell, as we've already kind of said, you can only tell so much from what you see in those media sessions of actual practice. There's been some fun clips, some really nice videos of connections between like Joe Milton and Donte Thornton. A lot of people are getting hyped on Donte Thornton, and some things like that. But just overall, it's tough to know exactly what to take away because they are reps against air a lot of times, yada yada. But what we're just going to try to say who stood out to us, and I'll also include, and I'll actually say this is my first entry into the who is standing out category. It can also count in who's standing out in these media sessions because, as we said, they've been allowing a lot of access to a number of different guys. A dude that I really liked, and how does this reflect on how he'll play on the field? I don't know, really none at all, probably. But I really loved the media session with John Campbell, the transfer from Miami, offensive lineman, and he went up and he just talked about the reasons he chose Tennessee, and by reports, he's looked pretty good on the practice field. Nothing,
but he's probably going to be the starting left tackle.
Yes, and which, hey, that counts for a lot, and Tennessee needs it badly. But what made me really, really like this kid a lot? He said, obviously, I think he even said like Tennessee wasn't really on his radar at first. Then he came and it really changed his mind, and he explained it out. It's a great clip. You should go find it. I think you even posted it, Zach. I think that's where I saw it. Maybe you didn't. I don't want to give anybody free publicity. That's not what we're here for. No, I don't care. You can find it somewhere. But specifically, he mentioned the fact that Knoxville had Waffle House. It was one of the main reasons he chose Tennessee. And I said, that's a man after my own heart right there. I like this kid. John Campbell's a good guy. Get him an NIL deal. If you don't know, Waffle House it's one of the most beautiful institutions on this great planet of ours. And John Campbell gets it. He just really does get it. So he's my first standout guy in fall practice.
I thought he dropped an interesting little note that I'd like to know more about and kind of how this came about. But he mentioned that he worked out and took the offensive line to Houston to work out with Trent Williams, and which is future Hall of Fame offensive tackle for the 49ers, like a 10-time Pro Bowler. That's definitely a guy that you'd want to learn from. So immediately I'm thinking, what's this connection? Are they from the same hometown? Did they go to, was Campbell somewhere else? Who knows what the connection might be? The only thing I can find is that Trent Williams, played at Oklahoma when Josh Heupel was the quarterbacks coach at Oklahoma, 06 to 09, I believe. So maybe Heupel set that up a little bit because not from the same hometown as Campbell. Campbell's at Miami, so there's really no connection there. I couldn't really find anything else that made sense. So perhaps, and I think that's when Joey Hosley was there as well too. So several connections to Trent Williams in Oklahoma through the coaching staff. That would be really interesting if kind of Heupel broke that out, because he also said that Trent Williams was part of why he came to Tennessee. So maybe he was doing his old coordinator, or not position coach, but one of his old coaches a favor.
Maybe. I love that. Very cool. And Heupel, it seems like Heupel has like a pretty deep network because he's had a lot of dudes come to games. A lot of guys came to the Orange Bowl.
The Giants general manager, when they drafted Jalen Hyatt, mentioned being close with Josh Heupel, and there was really no obvious connection between them either. So just in passing tells you Heupel's good at building relationships, at least.
Yeah, no kidding. That is an interesting note. Well, I'll throw it to you. Who's one of the guys that you've seen stand out so far, has been notable to you, Zach, in this fall camp session so far?
Really, for me, it's the entire defensive line. I think that is really the key to this defense this season. Obviously, it helps the secondary out because they've made it. I think it's been repeated a ton at this point. Almost every defensive lineman or Rodney Gardner, whoever gets up there and speaks, talks about wanting to create more pressure with their front four, and just hearing Elijah Herring talking about having freaks on the D-line and the edge rushers being freaks of nature. I mean, you hear that kind of stuff, and it really is like, okay, Tennessee's got some depth. You heard Dominic Bailey talk about this is the deepest defensive line they've had since he's been there. He feels like they can roll out 3 units and not have a big drop-off in play. I mean, this is what we've been talking about that Tennessee needs to compete with Georgia. And it doesn't mean they'll beat Georgia this fall, but late in the fourth quarter, you have a defensive line that's a little fresher than it was last year and the year before, and that could help turn that game. I mean, who knows? But that's kind of what you got to have. But Tyler Barron talking about he's bought in like a different guy. We've been talking about him trying to reach his potential for years now, and even listening to him talk at Tennessee's media day, he sounds like a completely different guy. He really does sound bought in, all about the team. What's going to help this team win? And it's like Rodney Gardner said, he's figured out that what's good for Tennessee is going to be good for Tyler Barron. So he's bought into that mentality. Hopefully that translates, but it seems like maybe the defensive line could be a real difference maker this season, even if, just from the depth standpoint. And they obviously have a lot of talent. I think that's the most exciting thing for me. More, we know what the offense has to offer. We know Squirrel White's been, going to be a guy. We know Donte Thornton's been looking good, catching some.
Farm Bureau Health Plans has been serving Tennesseans for over 75 years, and much has changed in Tennessee over the years, but some has stayed the same. Farm Bureau Health Plans has always valued personal relationships, especially when it comes to good health and good service. Plan on Farm Bureau Health Plans for health, dental, and vision. For better coverage, better rates, and better service, go to fbhp.com/ATOZ or walk into one of their 200 plus locations across the state of Tennessee. That is fbhp.com/ATOZ. Farm Bureau Health Plans.
Some nice deep passes. He seems like a guy. He spoke to the media today that's really studying the offense, making sure he's got it all down. He said he'd drive to Joe Milton's house sometimes if he doesn't understand the play, just to have Joe explain it to him and so they can go through it together. So he's putting in the work. We know about the running backs. For me, it's definitely the defense.
Yeah, I don't think you can understate how ridiculously huge it would be if the defensive line took a big step forward and really became a unit that could specifically help out the defensive backs. And I mean, General Nealand, I probably agree with this. He says in the comments, Willie Martinez is coaching to avoid a pink slip this year. I don't want to bring up negative thoughts like that before the season has even started, but I will certainly say last season, especially after that South Carolina game, I was one that was like, somebody needs to get fired for this, and it's probably Willie Martinez. And so if the defensive line could bring it and get pressure on these quarterbacks pretty consistently and just help with so that the defensive backs don't have to work as hard, that's an incredible place to start for this defense. That would just be huge. And so hopefully that does happen and that this fall camp is actually indicative of what will happen in the season. And as far as defensive back, that room goes, I hope they start standing out because Lord knows we need them to. There's go ahead.
I agree with the Willie Martinez thing. I liked Willie Martinez. He was around during the Butch years. He was always an assistant. I think people liked. But his unit has to perform. Kind of got a little bit of a pass last season because they had some good games. Defensive line wasn't kind of getting the pressure they wanted. They had to blitz a lot. But there was also technique stuff that we saw. I mean, I remember constantly texting about, we got players not looking for the ball. They're going down the field, getting pass interference calls, and they're not even looking back for the ball or underthrown balls that maybe could be intercepted. And instead, it's a DPI call. So you got to see that stuff improve. But also, they didn't really have good depth last year. You're moving people all over the place. Warren Burrell was hurt. Danico Slaughter's playing pretty much every position. It was different. It seemed week to week. He's all over the place. Couldn't really settle in. Kamal Hadden didn't look like he probably shouldn't have been out there quite yet. He might be one of the most athletic DBs on the team, if not the most athletic. He has the ability to be a great defensive back, but he just looked out of place at times. Like he wasn't sure what was going on, let his emotions get the best of him. If he takes another step forward or takes a step forward, you see some of this other stuff kind of go away, then you can have some faith in Willie Martinez at that point. But I do think it's a big season for him. Even if the DL does play better, still some stuff we need to see from that secondary that it's got to go away from some of that stuff we saw last season.
Yeah, 100%. We'll just have to see. It kind of damaged me psychologically last season, just having them lay such a giant egg in such a huge spot. I just, I go, even if they have a number of good games, because they had a number of good games last
Yeah.
season.
LSU,
Yeah.
Kentucky,
Yeah,
Clemson.
the Kentucky game was absolutely just insanely great. One of the best performances in a number of years, probably from a set of defensive backs for Tennessee in that specific spot when you were already ranked top 5. I mean, we all know what was going on there. And yeah, I that's going to be a whole season long evaluation for me where I'm going to go, can they bring it every single game? And especially when it matters, when maybe the playoff is on the line or something like that. I mean, I hope Tennessee gets in that spot again this season and that they actually come through.
Yeah, it's really just the consistency. I mean, that is the biggest thing is they got to find a way to be consistent. Maybe having a little bit more depth. You got Gabe Judy Lally coming in as well, the transfer from Vanderbilt or from BYU. Maybe that does help things out a bit. But I mean, they struggled even. They had moments against UT Martin in that first half. I remember after the Alabama game where it's like, these guys are just throwing the ball down the field way too easy. Tennessee has too many good athletes for that to happen. So it's definitely a huge point of emphasis, I'm sure, and certainly something to watch that if they want to win a championship like they're talking about a lot this week, which is the other thing that's been said a lot. I'm almost a little surprised at how much it's been said. Secondary has to play at an elite level.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was going to kind of be my last point, and maybe we can still shelve it here for another few minutes. But yeah, probably the main thing that stood out to me is the confidence just exuding from this team right now. But before we do go to that, a couple more players. I mean, you already mentioned him. Donte Thornton has been one. I mean, the guy is 6'5".
Yeah, we saw him in person back at the spring game, and we were
Yes.
Impressed at just the instant NFL size, long arms. Just looks like one of those dudes.
Yeah, he's a burner, and I think is set up perfectly for what Josh Heupel wants to do. And then, I mean, you just add in the speed of Squirrel White, you add in Brew, and that whole set of dudes. That's
Ramel Keaton.
Keaton, and everybody forgets him. And he had some of the most clutch, huge catches last season.
I mean, the Florida catch, the last drive of the Alabama game.
Yep. All
the way to that nice little strutting into the end zone touchdown reception against Clemson.
Yeah, it's that backbreaker touchdown against Clemson. Yeah, I mean, and that's a set of dudes you're working with wide receiver. That's just massive. And yeah, beyond that, I think I already mentioned offensive linemen, but to talk about their play on the actual field, we need more guys to emerge. As you said, they're figuring it out still on the offensive line because you're replacing who was likely the best offensive lineman in the Southeastern Conference last season. And so where do they go there? How do they do that? Replace not just that play, but that leadership that was brought on. That's a huge one that scares me with that offense too.